Welcome everybody. Today I want to go over overcoming AI and data challenges within pharma. A little bit of a disclaimer, I think, first. Is the clicker working? There we go. So, typical thing that you've probably seen, this isn't necessarily legal advice, the company is covered, this is my opinion, these kind of good things that if compliance is watching the recording, they know that I've actually gone through that, so that's very good. And a little bit about my organization, PharmaLex. So we help pharmaceutical companies with their data challenges, and we're part of a bigger organization called Cencora, who deal a lot with moving medicinal products between suppliers and distributors and pharmacies and such like that. I'm working in PharmaLex, and we are helping with data consultation and helping pharmaceutical companies with their data and AI needs. However, not everything that I'll be talking about will be very specific, let's say, to the pharma industry. There'll be things that you can use across different industries, because I know there's a lot of finance folks here today, and it's not necessarily a pharmaceutical conference here. And a little bit about myself. So my name is James Meeney. I'm the head of the data strategy and data governance service areas within PharmaLex. And what that means is I have a team of consultants who go into these large pharmaceutical organizations and help out with any of their data strategy, data governance needs. They do have a lot of people that are very, very intelligent when it comes to the technical stuff about setting up different AI chatbots, about setting up different single sources of truth, single source of data, compiling all of their data from legacy systems. I am happy to go through some of the technical stuff. However, I sit a lot more into the business side and how we can start working on different business processes. Additionally, because I do help with a lot of these as leading the projects and such, if you've got any questions going through, I want to give this a lot more of a practical kind of experience, because you hear a lot about, oh, we're doing this with AI, and it's a little bit of, what does that mean? How do you even start that kind of process? What are really going back to the basics? So if there's any questions throughout, I will be pausing at moments to answer them. But if you want to stick your hand up, I can answer that through, or try not to break my flow too much. And then if they want to go really deep dive into a session, we can do that. The reason I want to do that as well is I know we've had about an hour after lunch, food's starting to settle down, get a little bit more energy into the room, it might help out a lot. Equally, add us on LinkedIn if you've got any kind of data questions or anything like that, happy to discuss that at any point. So, moving into that, I'm really going to take this back to the basics. As I mentioned, a lot of the kind of talks that you're going to be getting today are going to be talking about what the final stages are, but I think one thing that's missing is really going back to this foundation. So if we really go, what is data governance? So for me, data governance is the link there between people, process, and technology. You probably hear that all of the time. And what I've made here is just a very small Venn diagram to say, okay, if we've got people, process, and here's our business stakeholders within it. We've got the people and the technology, so our IT stakeholders. We've got the technology and the process, sits our strategy for how we're going to work with the data. And what we try to do is link all of those to get to this central point of having a strong data governance foundation. For me as well, data governance is the act of making data usable, trustworthy, and available for all of those that need it. When I'm talking to our clients and such, I'll ask very, very basic questions, but it's things like, do you know who to talk to if you've got a question about your data? Can you trust your data when you get it? Have you ever been in a situation where you're looking for data and you can't find it? The answer to those is always the same, and it really, really doesn't matter often how mature you think your data processes are within your organization. These questions always can trip people up. And finally, at the heart of data governance is the data. May seem obvious, but we can't forget it. A lot of people focus very much on getting all of the new technologies coming through. They're going to buy all of the latest tools. They're going to implement it, and then they look and nobody's using it because they've forgotten about how to set up the people side of things, the change management. They've forgotten to put together the right business processes. They have made the wrong processes that have made things very, very complicated, difficult to work with, so therefore no one's adopting the new technologies. How do you make it so that whatever you're putting into the business is actually being used and you're actually getting some value from it? So we've got here data governance and data strategy. A little bit of a plug for my teams here, I have to admit. But it's about making sure that when you're working on all of these different areas, you may be familiar with this here. This is the Dharma data governance wheel, going into all of the different areas that I would consider data strategy and data governance. Things like quality, metadata, security, documents and content, all things that are very relevant to anybody that's trying to put together their AI initiatives. But again, I really want to bring things back down to their foundations here. Wonderful. So, applications of data governance in AI and pharma. So again, I mentioned that there's going to be a little bit of a cross-industry thing. So again, a little bit of an introduction to myself. I have worked across many different industries. I've worked in supply chain, I've worked in aerospace, I've worked in finance, and now currently working within pharmaceuticals. So when I talk about these data governance principles, I have noticed that they work basically across all of those industries. So if you're working within one of those as well, you've got a question, by all means, go for it. But specifically, data governance in AI can help lead to faster research. Seems obvious, but you was mentioned in the last talk, it takes what, like 6-9 years or something like that from conception to production of a drug. And one thing that has been very, very obvious during like the COVID pandemic, for example, the people that are first to the market are the people that kind of win that market. So therefore, a lot of people want to be able to have their research faster. You want to be able to start using things like AI to cut a lot of the operation time that you've got working onto it and ultimately enhance the outputs that you've got coming from your clinical safety area. And another interesting one, finding patients in new cohorts. So an interesting thing from pharma, how do you make sure that the right people are being used so that you're able to do the right clinical trials, the right testing, and making sure that the results that you've got is kind of making sure that the input is correct so that your output can be even better. There are many, many different applications for AI within pharma as well. You can use it for document writing, you can use it for consolidating all of your results to be able to produce reports quicker, all of these different things which again are very transferable to different industries, but specifically there is a lot of areas that you can use because there is just so much data when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So, meeting the global expectations, a little bit of an introduction. Is there any questions so far about what is data governance, about pharmaceuticals, AI? That was a very, very brief intro, so I don't think there should be many, but I'm happy to pause there if there is. Okay. So, I'm currently based in Germany. Originally from the UK, I moved to Germany about 5 years ago. Do we have any Germans in the room? Just one? Hello. So the DACH region is Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Luxembourg and that. But when we're working with our pharmaceutical customers, you do find that a lot of them sit around here. We are a global business, and this one was specifically for the European market, I'll say, but some of the challenges that exist within Germany are very interesting challenges that can exist across the world. So the first one, by the way, all of this is coming from trusted sources, let's say. I haven't made any of these figures up. Again, compliance, if you're watching, then that's nothing that I've done there. But less than 1 in 7 companies globally are fully prepared to adopt AI. You probably think about your company. If you was to say, can you do AI today? Answers are probably no. Germany is 6th place in Europe, behind the UK, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and unfortunately they didn't say what positions is missing there within the report, so I can't say that as well. But Germany is very behind. If you guys have had any kind of dealing with the German markets, they are very tech-phobic a lot of the time. One thing like living there that I've had to get used to from moving from London, they are a cash-based society. You go anywhere, you want to pay by card, it's just not going to happen. Everything's cash. They're even behind onto these kind of things. A little joke that is often there when you're within the trains or on the planes, people print out their tickets. They don't have like digital ticket IDs or anything. My wife is always printing things out, so whenever we're going on a holiday or traveling, I have to go with a big stack of paper. They're also very environmentally conscious, which is a bit of a contradiction there, but that's just a cultural difference, I would say. 3/4 of companies currently have no rules for use of AI. And again, this may be something that you can think about within your current organization. If you think about what are the different processes and policies that you have within it, you probably don't know exactly what your rules are. I mean, as an example, we have to have a blanket statement to say that you can't use DeepSeek or ChatGPT because of the different kind of liabilities that exist there. So the only rule is don't do that. And then they had to kind of figure out what that's going to be as those technologies advance. So now we can actually have our own, for example, internal chatbots, which we call SendChat and things like that, to make sure that we go around those different liabilities. We've got here as well, only 40% of German companies will have enough specialist staff to meet those requirements. So again, we're really looking onto the people side of things. It's okay wanting to implement the different AI ideas. It's all right getting the different budgets and the fundings. But then when you actually come to start these projects and you don't have the right people in place, you don't have the right skill sets or anything, where do you begin? How do you start that? And how do you know that what you're going to produce is going to be particularly valuable to the organization? And finally, 65% of people do not believe that there is a high-level understanding across their organization about global data privacy standards. This one is very, very interesting as well. When you start looking into places like Europe, where they have things like GDPR, and now the EU AI Act, which I'm sorry, I will be going into. A lot of these things were repeated through the talks earlier. I was kind of watching them thinking, damn, that kind of goes with a little bit of my content there, but I can also pivot for that one. We do not believe that they have a high level understanding. And then if you start looking into places like the US, into China, into India, how are you able to say that your global standards there are also meeting the global requirements for it? There's been a few interesting use cases coming out. I think it was mentioned in one of the previous talks that Europe is often used as a blueprint because we often have the most robust regulations and such when it comes to using data and protecting people. And there was a situation recently in California where they tried to pass a Californian AI Act bill, which was basically a copy of what they're doing within Europe, and it got rejected. And that then means that kind of opens up a load of views of what was wrong, what is different, how is that then going to change the different regulations if you're working in the US versus Europe, kind of opens that up, and there's not a huge view on how all of that goes together. So, speaking of the EU AI Act, I will go very briefly over this one, but I do want to give a little bit of a different insight to it. The EU have introduced a regulation to help build trust in AI-driven decisions that can impact the public. You've seen the different 4 levels. We've got unacceptable risks, so this is anything that has a clear threat to safety, livelihoods, and the rights of people. Again, working in the pharmaceutical industry, because everything that is being produced does have that direct link to people's safety and livelihoods, it has to be really taken carefully within our industry. We've got the high risk, so this is anything that can pose a serious risk to health, safety, and fundamental rights. And I agree with the previous statement that limited risk and minimal risk can kind of be lumped together because they have very few rules for it. And this is, again, things like your internal chatbots, making sure that anything that's not being directly driven to the public is being used internally, and making sure there's some right limitations around that. So, what is actually needed when we start looking into the high-risk area? As I said, it's one that's very, very interesting to the pharmaceutical industry. So therefore, when we start breaking it down into what's actually included within the regulation, a lot of it is very interesting, but also a lot of it is very cross-compatible. So the first one is data should be high quality. Any data that's being fed into an AI system should have some level of quality control around it. This goes back to our data governance foundations when you start looking into things like data quality. I'll link it back again a little bit later into the slideshow, but you need to make sure you understand what's going in there. The data should be traceable. So if you're producing anything or if you're ingesting any data, you should know where that data's come from. This gets very tricky, especially when you start using third-party data, data that you have bought, or for example, we work with something called IDMP, which is the identification of medicinal products, which is a big ontology where a load of organizations are coming together and they're trying to make a common vocabulary for different drugs, essentially. So therefore, everybody's providing the data. Everybody's providing what they're calling all of these things. It's kind of being centralized. So how do you make sure then that you are able to track all of that through the different third parties? How are you able to make sure you've got those right different relationship managements and such, so that you know that whoever you're working with is getting their data from a trusted area? The data needs to be documented, so therefore we need to understand what that data is, as well as it being understandable. So this goes into your different metadatas, this goes into your different business understandings, making sure that you've got the right people in place that do understand the data that you're working with. So again, really looking into that data governance framework. And the data needs to be secure. Working with the different security, making sure that anything that's being encrypted, you know how it's being done in such a way, making sure that any sensitive data is being secured there, and it's not kind of opening yourself up to any kind of exposure. And finally, the data should be owned. Ownership, when it comes to data, is a very tricky subject, especially when you start putting together the different data governance frameworks. You can talk about data ownership, you can talk about data stewardship, but one of the main things there is understanding what is the responsibility of the person when they're looking at that. For example, are they just cross-checking the different decisions that are being made? Are they the people that are producing the data, giving up the data? So therefore, knowing what those different roles and responsibilities are is crucial. And finally, if you have a clear data strategy and a robust data governance framework, that will help support compliance with the EU AI Act. Again, I have to say will support and not will make you compliant, just because, again, we can't open ourselves up to too much liability, but these are the different steps that you can take to make sure that you fit within that. And one of the reasons why I use the EU AI Act specifically, other than the fact that we are within Europe at the moment, is because it is very robust, it is very complex. So therefore, if you can make sure that you're working onto these different areas at all times, you do then make sure that you are compliant into future regulations that may be coming out. When we're building up these data governance frameworks, we do try to say you're getting compliance by design from it. So making sure that these kind of things are being built from the ground up really, really helps to that and kind of future-proof what you're working on. So that's all well and good, but what does that mean? How can you increase the AI capabilities within your organization? So the first one, know where your data comes from. We've mentioned about traceability, we've mentioned about data lineage, but create your data catalogs, understand what that data lineage looks like, and fill your data models. These, whenever my consultants go working within an organization, I always ask them to try and map the data that they're working with, just because whether it's from a data perspective, a conceptual layer, whether it's from the business perspective, understanding what that data is a very big help when you start working with it. A lot of places do not have their data lineage fully mapped out. A lot of places don't necessarily have their data catalogs created. We work very closely with places like Calibra and Informatica and all of the other smaller data catalogs so that we can understand how those catalogs work. Completely agnostic in what we're doing. We don't try to sell these, we just know how to work with them so that when we're actually building up the data catalogs, you're getting the most useful information. You're able to assign those people, you're able to have that metadata involved, it's clear, it's understandable, you've got common vocabularies, so that way, when you start going from the source of your data, you can follow it all the way to the end. Next is to build up the trust in the data. I think you mentioned trust is a very difficult thing and you shouldn't trust anything. However, much I agree with that, you can have a certain level. This goes into having your data quality initiative set up. I mentioned Informatica, they also have IDQ. There are various data quality tools that you can use. Pharma is a very interesting case because it's not necessarily just numbers, names, phone numbers, email addresses. You've got things like sound data, you've got picture data, you can have map data, for example, if you're working in the life science industry and you're looking into agriculture and you want to start looking into weather patterns and such. So all of this very, very unstructured and difficult data is difficult to make sure you've got the quality initiatives about, but that's again what makes it super important that you are very robust in your processes. Strong governance processes as well, making sure that everybody knows what they should be doing and how they should be working with that data, as well as having a very clear data strategy. What I mean by data strategy here is what are we trying to achieve with that data? So for example, it's all well and good getting everything together, but when you're trying to then produce, what are the different levels for the business and how are we going to drive any value with that data? That should be clear so that when we're working with that data, everybody's kind of moving in the same direction. Finally, have the right people working on your data. Having a strong data governance framework. What is the different levels of ownership? What are the different levels of stewardship? Where do the responsibilities begin and end? Having those clear responsibilities laid out, available for everybody to be able to see, so that if you are a data steward, for example, working in the clinical space, and you want to talk to a data steward that's working in HR or finance or something that's in a completely different area of your business, that you understand what their roles are going to be, so therefore when you're communicating, you know what kind of limitations you have within that. And finally, have a strong data ownership and stewardship network. Within every organization, you're going to have those people that are working closely with the data. You're going to have the people that understand the data way better than anybody else. So how do you identify these people? How do you make sure that they can give up some of their resource time for this data governance initiatives and making sure that when they are working on those processes, they are understanding clearly what they should be doing. Lovely. So, going into it then, what does that actually mean? It's all well and good me saying, build up your data catalogs, build up your data governance initiatives, et cetera, et cetera. So what I want to do is show how we start building these things up brick by brick when we go to our organizations. This is assuming you have an absolute zero-based level of data maturity. I know a lot of places, I'm going to think they have a strong data maturity, but when you start peeling back the layers, it becomes very clear that they have either missed some steps or that it's not across the whole organization. But first, when you start working on this idea of the data foundations, gather all of your data. Data exists in silos. Large organizations purchase smaller organizations. That data is now siloed. How do you make sure that you understand where all of your data sits? Identify your different redundancies. Make sure that all of the data is kind of flowing properly. Identify which of that data that you've now collated is your critical data. This is anything that can be used for driving your business needs. If you're working, for example, in regulatory, you're going to have a different set of critical data elements than you would if you're working, for example, in the R&D space. So you need to make sure you know which different area has the critical data, what those are for the different business units. Assign the different owners to that data so that if you ever have any questions about the data, you know exactly who to talk to, and make sure that those owners have their responsibilities mapped out in a clear planned strategy so that when you start moving forward, you've got a strong plan of, okay, this is the end goal we want to be. It might be something as simple as we want to set up a chatbot that you can use to talk and ask about different results from your clinical trials. It could even be a case that you're wanting to increase your analytics capability, so therefore you need to see what the different outputs are. As long as you have a clear strategy on what you want to work with that data and you know who you're going to be working with, that makes a very strong foundation for those data governance initiatives. So next is about the data enrichment. So this is where we can start now focusing on our data quality. We understand where our data is. We understand where the critical data sits. We know who's going to be working with us. So how can we make that data quality higher? It can be very interesting when you start looking at data quality from a technical perspective versus a business perspective. A good example that I had was when I worked in a bank in London, and there was a bit of a problem that they had because they worked with the UK Army and the military, which is a very old institution. So when you start looking at things like their creation date, it was something like 18 whatever, and that was against some of the rules that we had within our databases because it didn't go back that far. I think the database earliest date was something like 1901. Because this was then created in the 1800s, they had to call up and say, we're going to make a transaction, make sure it doesn't break all of your databases. And they said, okay, so we have to kind of create a way of doing it. But if we start looking at that at a technical perspective, you might see that creation date of the 1800s as being wrong. You know that the technical side is it should start at 1901. But if you look at it from a business perspective, there is a reason why that data is like that. So if you start then working with it, you can have some kind of rules there, making sure that that's very clear. Data integration. This comes from collating the data. We know where all of our data sits. How do we get the data that we need into one place? That then creates the single access points for our data, so that if you have a situation, for example, you want to have an enterprise data lake, for example, you know where that sits, you know what data is feeding into it. You might be in a situation where you want to have data products. So therefore, you want buckets of data. Where does that sit? How does that feed into it? Making sure that they know exactly where they're to go so that you don't have these redundant systems and that you know what data that you're pulling out is going to be the golden data. You know it's going to have a little bit more trust into it. So therefore, you don't have to go walking around the business sending 30, 40 emails trying to get to the right people. And reference and master data management as well is a very key one. Reference data starts coming into when you start looking into your data catalogs, start building up the different areas for it. Specifically within pharmaceuticals, you could start then looking into things like your ontology management and how that data starts linking together, as well as the master data. What data are you producing? Where are you kind of storing that? How is it being produced? Do you have the right processes in place? Start making these kinds of questions. Next, into the analytics and AI. So understanding where the different reporting metrics are. How are we able to showcase the value that we're producing from this? That way then you can start to make sure you've got the budget so that all of this can continue. The data modeling, this isn't necessarily about your data lineage. This is about understanding it from a conceptual layer. Does it fit with your business? Does it fit with your IT? Does the data model look different? So for example, there is a database, but it is held, for example, with finance and HR, if it's something like employee salaries coming out of it. So therefore, you've got loads of different areas, making sure that it's very clear where the responsibilities begin and where they stop. Semantics is more about making sure that your data is connected, making sure that if you're talking about a certain subset of data and it's linked to another subset of data, start building up those links. Again, this kind of can go into if you're working onto a drug within Europe, and then you need to start cross-referencing that versus the States. In America, they use a lot of brand names for their drugs, like, for example, Tylenol and stuff like that. I don't know if that's necessarily a drug name or if that's just a branded name. So therefore, how do I make sure that that's linked to something that I'm aware of in the UK? And finally, we're looking into your AI output. So this is where you're then looking, what are you trying to produce with your AI and how are you going to approach that? All of these kind of things will start going into your future business value, which will then obviously help you with your AI decision making and everything like that. Perfect.